On July 3, 1988, the United States military, or more specifically, a US Naval Warship, shot down this passenger plane, killing 290 people. The tragedy of Iran Air Flight 655 is one of the deadliest air disasters to have ever occurred. Was this a case of mistaken identity? If so, how was it mistaken? Was it a demonstration of pure negligence with devastating consequences, or both? In this video, we'll look at this flight, where it was going, the context of the environment it was flying in, the warship, and the actions of those on said ship. We'll first give a rundown of the events leading up to disaster from the point of view of the Iran Air flight, which really was supposed to be a totally routine, normal flight that was performed on the daily. On the morning of July 3, 1988, an Iran Air passenger plane left Tehran's Mirabad airport for a routine service to Dubai. The aircraft was an Airbus A300, one of the most state-of-the-art planes of the time. The European-built plane had been highly successful across the world. Though the plane would receive an upgraded variant with a more computerized flight deck, this particular plane was the older, slightly shorter model. Flying as Flight 655, this Iran Air A300 made a scheduled stopover in the city of Bandar Abbas on Iran's southern coast. From there, it was to make the 150-mile hop over the Strait of Hormuz to Dubai. There were 3 pilots that day in the cockpit of Flight 655. 37-year-old Captain Mohsen Razayan had 7,000 hours total flying experience. He was joined by his 2 work colleagues, the younger 31-year-old First Officer Kamran Timouri and 33-year-old flight engineer Mohammad Reza Amini. By all accounts, it was a young crew. Once finishing the turnaround in Bandar Abbas, they would be taking 274 passengers to the Emirates. Also on board were a further 13 crew members for a total of 290 people on board. Flight 655 was supposed to leave Bandar Abbas at 9:50 a.m. local time, but was delayed due to visa-related problems with one passenger, and so stayed on the ground for a further 27 minutes. Eventually, the plane was taxied out to the southwesterly facing runway and left Bandar Abbas at 10:17 a.m. The flight to Dubai should only have taken 28 minutes. Flight 655's flight plan would take the plane southwest over the Strait of Hormuz. For now, let's deviate from discussing what was going on in the air that day and look at what was happening in this general area. The Iran-Iraq War had been ongoing since 1980. 1 year prior to the outbreak of the war, the Iranian Revolution saw the US-backed Shah forcefully removed from power. By the time that 1988 had rolled around, the exports of oil and other goods were targets for both sides. Siding with Iraq during this time, the United States sought to protect their foreign interests along with protecting shipping lanes, and in doing so, mobilized naval vessels into the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Among the vessels deployed was a guided missile cruiser named the USS Vincennes. By July 3rd, the Vincennes was on its way back to Bahrain, where the crew would rest. Constructed in 1984, this ship was for its time among the most technologically sophisticated machines ever built, equipped with state-of-the-art defenses and weapons called an Aegis combat system. It was one of a few ships to have such weapons. The Vincennes' captain during this time in 1988 was a man by the name of William Rogers. Aged 49, by the time of the incident he had spent over 20 years in service, having served on other vessels. He joined the Vincennes as second commanding officer, before heading up to captain in April of 1987. On the morning of that July day, a helicopter deployed from the USS Vincennes had received fire from an Iranian gunboat, whilst reportedly flying over international waters. The crew of the Vincennes had received news of aggressive activity from another United States ship in the region. The Vincennes, commanded by William Rogers, sought to engage with the Iranian gunboats, and shots were fired from the Vincennes at just after 9:43 a.m. The details of this confrontation can vary, as though the Vincennes claims this occurred in international waters, the nearby nation of Oman claims they violated their territorial waters and ordered them to leave. This occurring before Flight 655 left Bandar Abbas. The Vincennes would then be positioned in an area south of Kesham Island. Flight 655 would fly overhead nearby. Being a modern naval vessel, airspace was being monitored with the onboard radar. The Aegis system comes with large radar coverage with a radius of over 300 kilometers and large screens in the information center that personnel monitor constantly. On hand was a rough timetable for commercial flights in the area. Because of the activity the Vincennes was engaging with in that morning, the context of that situation had meant that anything approaching the vessel was to be considered as a potential threat. The Iran Air passenger plane would soon appear on their radars. Also in the skies was an Iranian surveillance and reconnaissance aircraft, a Lockheed P-3 Orion, a plane that the new Iranian Air Force effectively inherited from the United States following the ousting of the US-backed regime in 1979. That plane had received communication from the Vincennes, informing them of their presence. They responded and largely stayed away from the Vincennes, though the US ship stayed on high alert. By the time that Flight 655 left Bandar Abbas nearly 30 minutes later than normal, the crew of the Vincennes were not expecting any commercial flights to be passing by at that time. This also was not helped by the fact that the time used on the Vincennes itself was not accurate in relation to local time and was running behind 30 minutes on Bahrain time. It can be easily argued that this created a certain level of confusion for the crew of the Vincennes, when coupled with Flight 655's already delayed departure from Bandar Abbas. The pilots of Flight 655 were piloting a passenger plane and were oblivious to the shots that were fired in the area they were about to fly into. Moments after the A300 left the ground, it was picked up on radar by the Vincennes. The crew of the battleship would now go through a process to identify the aircraft, much the same way they did in identifying the Iranian reconnaissance plane from earlier. The ship comes with an IFF system, which stands for Identification Friend or Foe. IFF works by interacting with an airplane's transponder. An electrical signal was sent out from the Vincennes as a message of identification. The Airbus A300's own internal radios replied. The pilots would have entered a squawk code into the transponder. In this case, the exact 4-digit code was 6760. Different identifying codes can reveal whether a plane is a civilian or military plane. What Flight 655 sent back was a generic code on a mode setting which did not reveal the plane's status as either civilian or military. In basic terms, all the plane sent back was that it was a plane. Operators on the Vincennes then consulted their timetables, but as already discussed, Iran Air Flight 655 departed late, and the Vincennes crew were not expecting a passenger plane to be flying by during this time. The next step was taken, and the Vincennes attempted to contact the plane on a military radio frequency. As it was a passenger plane performing a routine flight, there was obviously no reply. Now, I want to prepare you for what I'm about to tell you. The USS Vincennes was considered to be one of the most technologically advanced warships of its day, equipped with the most modern of computerized systems the late 1980s could allow, and it didn't even come equipped with the basic technology to tune into civilian radio frequencies, meaning there was no way they could contact the plane on the frequencies Flight 655 was tuned into. The only radio frequency they could tune into that was civilian was the distress frequency, but Flight 655 was not in distress, and so there was no reason they would be listening into it, and again did not respond when the Vincennes inevitably did try to contact them on said frequency. Even if they did hear these transmissions, the Vincennes did not make it clear who they were supposedly broadcasting to. It wasn't like they had flown into restricted airspace. They were flying along an international civilian air corridor. It appeared that there was a change in the transponder mode that was picked up by the IFF. That, according to their own internal sources, resembled an F-14 fighter plane. The IFF system picked up this alternative signal, likely from an actual F-14 plane that was based in Bandar Abbas and not the A300. Still, they labeled the radar echo on their radars that was in fact the A300 as the non-existent F-14, a plane which, again, the new Iranian Air Force inherited following the revolution. Note that this new transponder mode does not label the plane as such, but rather it has been known that Iranian fighters have used this code. so it doesn't say it is, only that it could be a military plane. The Vincennes crew manually labeled it as an F-14. The time was now 10:20 local time, and Flight 655 was assigned to climb up to an altitude of 14,000 feet. Over the next few minutes, the Vincennes would seek authority to shoot the plane down. A fault in one of the ship's weapons prompted the captain to reorient the vessel to prevent any further aggression from enemies on the water. The Iranair plane and Captain Roussel are totally oblivious to the fact that they have been misidentified as a military threat and continued their flight none the wiser. A confirmation between the plane and civilian air traffic control confirmed that Flight 655 was squawking the correct code. The IFF code on the Vincennes would change again back to the generic code which it was first identified as. One crew member on the Vincennes even signaled to Captain Rogers that the plane was possibly a commercial aircraft, to which he acknowledged. Captain William Rogers was apparently still concerned by the fact that the plane was not responding, as it flew closer to the ship. At 10:22, Captain Rogers delayed engaging with the plane for now. Pressure would mount, however, as it would appear that the plane had descended. This was incorrect. Those monitoring the airspace did not perform their job correctly by cross-checking their information, as data recorded from the USS Vincennes itself revealed that the plane did not descend, but rather continued its gradual climb. At 10:24, Captain William Rogers orders that the plane which they believed was a military threat, but was actually a passenger plane, be shot down. 2 SM-2ER anti-aircraft missiles were fired from the USS Vincennes. Though the 2 missiles had been launched, they could be destroyed during their ascent should the plane respond, revealing their intentions. Again, there was no reason the A300 pilots would be tuned into any frequency the Vincennes could transmit in, and there was no response. Moments later, Iranair Flight 655 was destroyed, and 290 lives were lost. The world demanded answers, as it was swiftly revealed that a US Naval Warship had shot down a passenger plane in a regularly operated international air corridor. An investigation was launched by the United States Navy that would examine the events of that morning, with Captain Rogers having faced the prospect of serving time in prison. It was revealed in the investigation that an actual Iranian F-14 was stationed at Bandar Abbas, emitting the usual signal that would be expected, but this was confused with Flight 655's own signal. It was concluded that Captain William Rogers acted with incorrect information relayed to him from his own crew, but his actions were not the result of negligence. This conclusion naturally brought skeptics, as a culture of looking for action was criticized. Under Captain Rogers' actions, in engaging with Iranian gunboats that morning, he put the Vincennes in close proximity to Flight 655's flight path and actually inside Iranian water. Perhaps in a questionable move to many, crew members of the USS Vincennes, including Captain Rogers, received honors for their work, Rogers himself receiving the Legion of Merit. The United States government refused to take responsibility for the disaster, also going on further to say that Iran had some responsibility for allowing passenger planes to fly near war zones. Iran brought the case to the International Court of Justice, and it wouldn't be until 1996 when the United States agreed to pay compensation for the disaster. The fallout of this incident really does deserve its own examination in full at some point in the future, but I invite you in the meantime to perform your own investigation and arrive at your own conclusions. Before we conclude the video, I feel it's necessary to draw some parallels between this disaster and that of Korean Airlines Flight 007, which was shot down by the Soviet Union in 1983 over Far Eastern Russia. There are some similarities between the two incidents which occurred in the 1980s. How in both scenarios, passenger planes were shot down with the understanding they were of a military threat. Some differences, though, may include the fact that Korean Airlines 007 unknowingly flew into restricted airspace, while Iranair 655 did not. The Russians involved in the Korean Air shootdown intercepted the plane, still choosing to fire at it, whereas the US did not, or perhaps could not, perform such tasks on a warship. They were relying on information fed to them from radar, and to the captain trusting that information to be correct from his crew. Perhaps it may also be worth comparing the Iran Air incident to that of the much more recent downing of Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752, which also involved Iran, this time in shooting the plane down. We'll examine this incident in its own video at some point, but I want to draw attention to something that's very interesting to me being a media person myself, and that is the differences in how American media in particular framed the Korean Air and Iran Air disasters when compared side by side. The Korean Air incident framed as cold-blooded murder, and the Iran Air incident that of a mere mistake. It's an interesting case of a blatant double standard in media propaganda, especially in the United States, that deserves investigation that is beyond the scope of this video. Instead, I would like to extend an invite to a creator in the area of media analysis to investigate this further. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video to be interesting, be sure to subscribe as there will be a new video next Saturday. And if I get it finished in time, that will be a very interesting one. Anyway, it is that time of the week where I take a moment to thank my patrons over on Patreon for their amazing support. If you fancy having your name featured at the end of the next video and get early access to all new content, consider joining the Disaster Breakdown Patreon from £3 per month, and the link to that will be in the pinned comment below. A thank you to the £5 tier patrons: Adventures is Stupid, Alice Luttress, Avery Tioda, Barlavon, Chillhelm, Hunter Heilman, Hector Palmatellas, Joey, John Ambrosia, KTP123, Kelly Randoja, Ken Zachman, Kenneth Morins, Len, Leon Sant Jennings, Lizzie Wizzy Let's Get Busy, great name, Marie Ennis, MG, Michelle, Mom Left Me at Best Buy, MX Koi-Fish, Pac-Man7, Panic Chicken, Pedro Cruz, Rebecca Rivers, Rez, Rio Wheatley, Saria Melody, Sleepy, and Tristan Kriegsman. And a special thanks to the very generous £10 tier patrons: Ada Montgomery, Ann Sid, David Dabrowski, Derek Bean, Epsilon, Karma, Maga Seal, Mike Milton, Roger Mayer, So FP, Steve Cottrell, Thick Coconut, Trans Rights Baby, Vapronva, and Where Are My Cheetos? Thank you all so much. And that is it for me this week. I hope you have a good weekend, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.